Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. Today on the show, all about the Timberwolves' loss to the Kings on Monday night, a blown opportunity to win a fourth consecutive game, and what would have been a 12th win in 16 games. This one was all about Ant's great offense, but the Wolves' sloppy offense overall, and some missed defensive assignments down the stretch, allowing De'Aaron Fox to go off. I want to break that down in detail. What exactly happened at the end of really fourth quarter and overtime in this game for the Wolves? We're going to break it all down on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody. It is not a victory Tuesday. However, the Wolves fell to the Kings on Monday night in disappointing fashion. It was an overtime game, but certainly a missed opportunity for the Wolves. I want to get into what exactly happened in this one, key takeaways and individual studs and duds here in just a moment. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch the show on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so on the post-game pod, I don't like to just go blow for blow and recap the game because I don't think that's super helpful. If you're listening, you probably watched it. If you didn't, you could go rewatch it or read the play-by-play if you wanted to. I don't know that me going blow by blow is the most helpful thing, but what I do want to do is focus in on what exactly happened at the end of this game for the Wolves, because those kind of are my key takeaways and really a microcosm of the game overall. And so let's start with the Wolves defense. I think the offensive sloppiness, that's the next thing we'll talk about, but let's start with the defense because De'Aaron Fox had a great game for the Kings and he's a borderline all-star, really good player. So, there's no shame in him scoring 32 points on 27 shots, right? Like, it wasn't ultra efficient. The Wolves actually only allowed him to shoot 5 free throws in this game. But what happened late in this game, it became as inescapably clear over the course of the entire game that nobody on the Timberwolves could guard De'Aaron Fox except for Jaden McDaniels. And Anthony Edwards didn't really guard him much until the end of the game, after others proved that they could not guard him. So the Wolves tried putting McDaniels on Fox. The Kings were trying to hunt switches, and the Wolves switched in a couple of different instances late in this game. Well, let me back up a little bit. Early in the game, Jalen Noel was matched up against Fox for several possessions in a row, and De'Aaron Fox ate his lunch. Like, he just dominated him. And that's not a surprise. Noel's not a good defender. De'Aaron Fox is a really difficult player to handle on the offensive end of the floor. A couple times during the game, Austin Rivers was guarding him when he was in the game. That did not go well for the Wolves either. Austin Rivers struggled to stay in front of De'Aaron Fox. Most people do, right? Jaden McDaniels, however, his length at least bothered Fox. And it felt like, and I'd have to go back and rewatch this to make sure that I just am not remembering this wrong, but it certainly felt like Fox was getting closer to the rim and getting off shots that were less contested when the likes of Noel and Rivers and D'Angelo Russell and others were guarding him. The Wolves tried to not have D'Lo guard him, but Jaden McDaniels' length certainly bothered him. And even if McDaniels wasn't entirely staying in front of him, the length, rearview mirror contests, just kind of trying to recovery speed, all that stuff helped with McDaniels. For the most part, I think he did a better job staying in front. So down the stretch, Chris Finch was basically trying to go offense, defense with D'Angelo Russell and Austin Rivers, and that only works to a point. And the Kings actually, while Rivers was actually on the floor, I forget who it was that Rivers was guarding, but the Kings successfully got a switch. The Wolves switched the action at the top of the circle, and McDaniels was supposed to be guarding Fox, but after the switch, it was Rivers. This is in a tie game with a minute and a half left. And obviously a lot led up to this, but tie game with about a minute and a half left on the switch. Rivers is guarding Fox, complete blow by. Fox hits about a 10-footer at a float to the side jumper. And the Kings got a lead that they never fully relinquished. Obviously, the game went to overtime, but this was a pivotal moment in the game, and Fox just cooked Rivers. That happened multiple times in this game. The Timberwolves just continue to struggle with quick athletic guards. And Fox is special, and I get that, but this is a recurring theme for the Wolves, and it's because they only have one point guard on the roster. It's D'Angelo Russell, and he's at times a passable defensive guard, but he's never been good in isolation against quick guards. And, Jordan McLaughlin would, I think, put up some resistance because he's the guard that gets overwhelmed by bigger guards, right? But he's quicker and has quick hands and is generally okay defensively. I think would be a better match against the De'Aaron Fox. Kyle Anderson can't guard De'Aaron Fox, not with any more success than anyone else did. Austin Rivers, I think he's always been maybe a little overrated defensively in terms of his actual impact. But, I don't know. Has he lost a half step? Is De'Aaron Fox, prime De'Aaron Fox that much faster? Apparently so, right? It's a consistent problem for the Wolves when you play teams that have dynamic guards, and De'Aaron Fox is one of the more dynamic guards in the entire league, and the Wolves really struggle with that. However, the other issue down the stretch was that miscommunication for the dunk that the Kings got. And now I think it was Trey Lyles that stuck in for the dunk. This was, let's see, what was the exact timing of this? I guess, it was when it was a 3-point game at the end of overtime. That's what it was. So the Wolves had gotten back to within 3. Overtime did not go well for Minnesota, but they get back to within 3. They were down 111-106. They were down 112-106. They were down 6. The Timberwolves get down to a 3-point deficit after Jaden McDaniels 3-point play and an offensive rebound with under a minute to play. So it's a 3-point game, 1-possession game with about 45 seconds left. The Timberwolves get the Kings all the way down in the shot clock, and the Kings are spread out. They're basically playing, they've flattened out, and Fox is isolating at the top of the key. And D'Angelo Russell's, the Wolves have hid D'Angelo Russell on Trey Lyles. And the Wolves did this with Rudy Gobert sometimes in this game, where he was essentially just guarding the corner so he could help off of Lyles and crash down into the paint and get a help side block. But in this case, D'Lo was guarding Trey Lyles. And D'Lo and Kyle Anderson, if you go back and watch the possession, are kind of pointing. D'Lo's doing most of the pointing, and he's actually pointing at, I forget who Kyle Anderson's man was, but he's pointing to Kyle Anderson, hey, Slow-Mo, you have him. Based on D'Lo's pointing, he's still guarding Trey Lyles, right? If you go back and watch this. And then Lyles cuts backdoor against D'Angelo Russell, which how many times have we seen that? Not even from the corner, from basically almost the slot, right at about the break. Cuts backdoor, gets a wide open dunk, and then D'Lo, does the thing where he throws his hands up like it's not his fault. That was absolutely D'Angelo Russell's fault, unless for some reason the Timberwolves had decided to switch some sort of action like that. But really all it was Lyles just lost him. He floated to the corner, floated up to the perimeter, and Anderson's man stayed in the corner, and Lyles came up. Russell apparently lost him in his peripheral, and Lyles just backdoor cut and got a dunk. And that's on D'Angelo Russell, at the very least, for not communicating more clearly with Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson was guarding his man, and D'Lo apparently also was, even though he was further away than Kyle Anderson. So that was on D'Lo. Anthony Edwards after the game didn't want to talk to reporters and said something about how he'd say the wrong thing after this one. Speculating. Who knows? Did it have to do with that possession? There's obviously lots of things to be frustrated. I haven't mentioned this, but Domantas Sabonis fouled out in regulation, arguably the Kings' best all-around player. The Timberwolves played an overtime period with no Sabonis on the floor and were a -7, lost the game by 7. There's lots of things to be frustrated about, right? And honestly, I don't think officiating is one of them in this game, because the Kings actually shot less free throws than the Wolves. The Wolves just didn't make their free throws, right? So I don't know what else Ant is referring to, unless he's just generally frustrated. I'm completely speculating, but he seemed frustrated after that play, as everyone was, but he did, put his hands up and kind of looked at D'Lo mostly. So who knows? All I know is that was a bad miscommunication. I should also mention Anthony Edwards did guard Fox at times late fourth quarter overtime, and I thought did a good job. In fact, at the end of regulation in a tie game, Edwards got beat off the dribble, but recovered in time to contest. And it was a near air ball, if it wasn't an air ball, from Fox at the end of regulation. I thought Edwards and McDaniels were the Wolves. They always were the Wolves' best chance, right? They're their two best perimeter on-ball defenders, and they both were pretty good against Fox in this game. But nobody else, Rivers, Noel, Russell, nobody else could really provide much resistance at all to the Kings, to De'Aaron Fox of the Kings. So bad defense down the stretch is my first takeaway from this game. And that's really what hurt the Wolves the most. Containment of De'Aaron Fox, the lack thereof, and then that dunk from Trey Lyles and the miscommunication. I do want to talk about the terrible sloppiness on offense, because that was also an issue throughout the game, but also especially down the stretch. So we're going to do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our presenting sponsors, our friends, our new friends over at FanDuel. We are really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sportsbook in America, FanDuel. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. The FanDuel app is fantastic, and the Super Bowl is the best time to bet, and FanDuel is the place that you have to do that at. Join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, other takeaways from Wolves Kings. Let's talk about the offense. Just more complete and utter sloppiness with the ball. We talked about this. This was actually a pretty big focus of Monday's episode of the show. Was this team's profile so far this season on both ends of the floor, and offensively they're turning it over so much more than what we're used to seeing, or at least what we saw last year. They're coming into this game. The Timberwolves were 28th in turnover percentage league-wide. So they were the third worst team. They turned it over 14.1% of the time. And this is coming on the heels of turning the ball over 19 times on Saturday against the Kings and 19 times on Friday against Memphis. So the Timberwolves have now turned it over 19 times Friday, 19 times Saturday, 18 times in this game against the same Sacramento Kings that turned them over 19 times on Saturday. It's a worrying pattern after the turnover issue had actually gotten a little bit better. But again, 28th in the league in turnover percentage coming into this game. That was a major, major issue. The Kings ended up scoring 21 points off of the Wolves' 18 turnovers, so more than a point per possession on Wolves turnovers. And if you break down those 18, Anthony Edwards committed 6, so a third of the Wolves' turnovers. Another third was committed by Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson combined. The two veteran starters each committed 3 turnovers. That's half of your team's turnovers right there between Gobert, Edwards, and Kyle Anderson. That's bad math. 2/3 of your turnovers right there between those 3 guys. And with Anthony Edwards, of course, he's got the ball in his hands more than any other Timberwolves player. You expect that there's going to be some degree of turnovers, right? That's going to happen. But I mean, there was the one where he just dropped the ball out of bounds. I think it was early third quarter, just kind of went through his hands out of bounds. Okay, you can get one of those a game. Late in the fourth quarter, the Wolves are pushing the ball down the floor. Or actually, no, this is in the half court. I think Ant was kind of being trapped in the middle of the floor, and he gets a pass deflected and stolen by Malik Monk. In overtime, he's headmanning the pass up the floor. I may have flipped these two, but one was fourth quarter, one was overtime. There was a kind of a headman pass where he's at center court, tries to get it to McDaniels in the right corner, gets stolen by Malik Monk. Those were all sloppy, unnecessary turnovers. And you just take 2 or 3 of those out. You could deal with 3. You could even maybe deal with 4 turnovers if you're playing, 35 minutes or something like that in this game, and, score as many points as he did. And he played 41 minutes in this game, shot the ball 27 times, had 5 assists. You could deal with a small handful of turnovers, right? Absolutely. But 6 is a lot, especially when at least half of them are completely careless and senseless turnovers. So, and that's an issue. We've talked about that before in the show. That's one of the things that's holding Ant back right now, I think, from being a true superstar, is the assist rate is going in the right direction, but the turnover rate is really spiking here at times. And that was an issue in this game. And for the Wolves as a team, it's the Wolves came into this game 19th in offensive rating, I believe, on Basketball Reference, and 28th in turnover percentage. The shooting has gotten better and better and better, although this game was an exception there. We'll talk about that in a moment. But turnover rate's a big issue. And then, of course, obviously, live ball turnovers are going to lead to fast breaks the other way. We saw that with each of Ant's live ball turnovers I mentioned late fourth quarter and in overtime. Those live ball turnovers are going to disproportionately lead to success, easy baskets on the other end, wide open threes in transition or dunks, layups, fouls, etc. And lo and behold, the Kings get 21 points on 18 Wolves turnovers in this game. And you're just undercutting yourself by turning it over that many times. The Wolves also did not shoot it well from anywhere. Sacramento is a bad defensive team. They came into this game 21st in defensive rating. They were 24th in effective field goal percentage coming into this game. And the Kings, by the way, were only 15th in opponent turnover percentage, so middle of the pack, and they turned the Wolves over a combined 37 times over 2 games. The Kings did. In terms of the Wolves shooting, again, Kings 24th in effective field goal percentage, 21st in defensive rating coming in. The Wolves shot 46.7% from the field. They were okay in the paint, but they were 30.8% outside the arc, 12 of 39. D'Lo was 2 of 10. Ant was 4 of 11. That's fine. I mean, that's basically his average, right? Everybody else, like, for the most part, was okay. Nas was 0 for 4. But D'Lo was 2 of 10. So 12 of 39, under 31% from 3. And then at the free throw line, this is where it really hurt. 13 of 25 on free throw attempts, a hideous 52%. Now, Gobert shot 10 of the Wolves' 25 free throws. So, yeah, you're only going to make probably 6 of those, right? Well, he only made 5. D'Lo was 0 of 3 at the free throw line, which is just a killer. Like, a guy who I'll take the blame for this one. On my show on Monday, I talked about he was shooting a career high over 87% from the free throw line. And that was, the shooting percentages, career high from 3-point range, career high on 2-pointers, career high at the free throw line in terms of percentage. And here he goes, has a miserable shooting night. So I point you to my podcast title, the episode title from Monday, is D'Angelo Russell's play sustainable, or something to that effect. Well, the short answer is no. I mean, that's what my conclusion was in the podcast. But the very next night, actually the same night that podcast publishes, he comes out and shoots 4 of 16, 2 of 10, and 0 of 3 at the line. We'll talk more about him in studs and duds. Spoiler alert there. I bet you can't, but you don't know which category D'Lo will be in for this game. Ant was just 1 of 4 at the line. And there's all your misses, basically. Jaden McDaniels was 2 of 3, but like, yikes, 13 of 25 at the free throw line. You can't have your starting backcourt, D'Lo and Ant, combined for 1 of 7 at the free throw line. You can't have one made free throw between D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards, who are effectively your offense at this point, right? Like, that's where the offense comes from with no Karl-Anthony Towns. Obviously, those guys helped get Rudy Gobert involved. But, like, you can't have one made free throw between D'Lo and Ant. That's just not a realistic way to try and win a basketball game. So anyway, I did turn it over too much, sloppy with the ball, didn't shoot it well from anywhere, and against a bad defensive team in the Kings. Like, the Kings are a good team generally. They're not a great defensive team. Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert were like the only guys that came to the party in this game, besides that big Jaden McDaniels 3-pointer late in the game. I should mention that the Wolves were down 3, and Jaden McDaniels hits that big 3 from the wing to tie it. And then the next possession, Anthony Edwards locks down De'Aaron Fox. The game goes to overtime. But that's a massive 3 from McDaniels, and I want to point that out. But with no D'Angelo Russell, like, and not because he didn't play, but because he played really badly, Rudy Gobert had 19 and 14, 7 of 9 from the field, but just 5 of 10 at the line, as I mentioned. A lot of this was dunks early. He was playing a lot in the dunker spot, which the Wolves haven't done a ton of this season. And Rudy got some easy dump offs for dunks. I don't know that he actually scored on any lob, like actual alley-oop dunks in this game. He only had 1 offensive rebound, but I believe he scored off that. But Rudy had a nice game, 19 and 14. But this was really only Ant. Jalen Noel scored 14 off the bench, was his typical high usage self. Like, nobody came to the party except for Ant, a little bit of Rudy, Jalen Noel off the bench. Just a really lackluster offensive performance for Minnesota. I know they scored 111, but they only scored 103 in regulation, and the offense ground to a halt at times, was very reliant on Ant scoring, and he had some tough buckets in this game. We'll talk about that here in a minute as well. All right, we'll leave the takeaways at that. I mean, like, not much else to say about this one other than they played so well for so long in this game. Winning at halftime, what were they up? 2 at halftime. They were up 3 going to the fourth quarter, and then battling back from down a couple of possessions with a minute to play. Like, that was impressive. Even in overtime, getting it back to 3 points. And with no Sabonis in overtime, the Wolves had no business losing this game, but a combination of sloppy turnovers, bad defense, the miscommunication, the Ant issue, or excuse me, the D'Lo miscommunication to let Lyles break through for the dunk, all that stuff adds up in the end, and the Timberwolves lose this game by 7 in overtime. All right, I want to talk individual studs and duds here, and that is how we will close the show today. All right, individual studs and duds, pretty easy for this one. Anthony Edwards does get a stud. Yes, there was some sloppiness, the 6 turnovers, but he was hardly the only one. And again, you get a little bit of a pass for scoring 33 points, having 8 rebounds and 5 assists, and being basically the only guy that looked like he was entirely ready to play and played well the entire game for the Wolves. Anthony Edwards had a stat-stuffing performance. 14 of 27, will take over 50% from the field any day of the week. 4 of 11 from 3, will take about league average from 3 any day of the week. I mean, that's like 37-ish%. Yeah. 8 rebounds. Fantastic. Rebounds have been improving for Ant. We've talked about this before. We'll talk about it again. That's a big part of his game that has improved. Clearly, the Timberwolves challenged him to do work on the glass, especially in some of these matchups where they really need him to. He did his part in this game. The Wolves were only a -1 on the glass, only give up 10 offense. Well, 10's kind of a lot, but did okay in terms of allowing second chance points to the Kings in this game. Ant had 5 assists that was partially negated by the 6 turnovers, but he also added 2 steals and 2 blocks. And like I said earlier, was really good defensively on De'Aaron Fox when he was matched up against him. I thought he was actually probably did the best. Now, Jaden McDaniels, I mentioned him earlier. I didn't really talk about he left the game in the first quarter for a little while, went back to the tunnel, I think all the way back to the locker room. It sounded like after the game, they were saying there was an illness or something with McDaniels. So perhaps that affected him. And I actually thought McDaniels did okay, but Edwards was the best on Fox in this game. The turnovers are really the only blemish on Anthony Edwards' performance. I thought he played well overall. I'm going to have to give Rudy Gobert a stud too. I know the 5 of 10 free throw shooting is not great, but like, I mean, tell me 2 other players that played well. Jalen Noel is my 3rd stud. We'll talk about him in a second. It's got, like, you could maybe argue Kyle Anderson. He had 9, 8, and 6 in this game, but missed a couple of wide open shots. Would have been huge to hit him. I thought he was just okay defensively. Had the silly technical foul when he was jawing at either De'Aaron Fox or the official. I don't really know. I'm going to go Gobert for my 2nd stud. 19 and 14, 1 assist, 1 steal. Active early, got to the line a bunch, which was great. 3 turnovers, no blocks, but one of only 3 Timberwolves players with the positive plus minus. And again, very good early in this game. Well, really only 1 of 2. The only other, there were 3 Timberwolves with a positive plus minus. Gobert was a +5. Jalen Noel was a +8. And then Matt Ryan was a +6 in just 3 minutes. He played like at the end of the first half, I think it was. Didn't record any stats. Was just a +6 in 3 minutes because he was there. My 3rd stud is Jalen Noel. Actually did play pretty well and played like his hair was on fire. Still finished somehow with the 3rd most field goal attempts on the Wolves, despite the fact he only played 22 minutes, but played well. 14 points, 5 of 10 shooting, 1 of 3 outside the arc, 3 of 3 on free throws, 2 rebounds, and a steal for Noel. Did have the Wolves' best plus-minus mark for what that's worth. Again, if you haven't heard me say it before, I always like to reiterate, there's a lot of noise in individual single-game plus-minus, but for what it's worth, a +8 in that category. I thought he played well. I still think there's a chance he gets moved at the deadline. I think not that the Wolves have a ton of depth at that position, unless Chris Finch thinks he just wants to ride, go Austin Rivers and give Wendell Moore some minutes, but you lose all that offensive punch, right? And I know in theory Rivers can score a little bit, but it's not quite the same as what Jalen Noel thinks he provides and does sometimes. But I would be willing to bet if a team was willing to give up a couple of 2nd rounders or something, the Wolves would consider that and then go shopping in the buyout market for maybe a higher usage type guy. I don't know. Maybe, who knows? Maybe that's a solution for if Patrick Beverley gets bought out. Obviously, Pat Bev is not anywhere near the offensive player that Jalen Noel is, but you get rid of probably your worst perimeter defender in Noel, and you gain a plus perimeter defender in Pat Bev. I mean, that's on the table, right? Anyway, I digress. That's a topic for another show. Duds, D'Angelo Russell all day long. After how good he's been the last few games, this was ultra disappointing. 10 points, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, but he shot 4 of 16 from the field, was just very quiet early, and then kind of went into chucking mode a little bit as the game wore on, was 2 of 10 outside the arc. So he was 2 of 6 on 2-pointers, 2 of 10 on threes, 0 of 3 at the line, just completely unsightly. And had a couple of turnovers, pretty bad defense typically for D'Lo, or typically bad defense for D'Lo. Just a bad performance. I don't know. It just was not good. Very harmful to the Wolves in this game. I don't know that anybody else fits that category. Naz did not have a good game. I guess if I had to pick a second dud, it would be Naz Reid. 6 points, 3 rebounds, but he's just 3 of 9 shooting, 0 of 4 outside the arc. Had a silly technical right after he got called for a blocking foul. I will say that particular call, like, he should have been allowed to react. It was like immediately he got called for a technical. He was still sitting on the floor. He couldn't have said much. Technical felt silly on the ref side more than it did on Naz's side, but still, not Naz's best game, not what we've gotten used to seeing from him of late. So a bit disappointing there. All right, next up for the Wolves, they have the Warriors on Wednesday. We'll preview that matchup on Wednesday's show, and then the Magic on Friday, the Nuggets on Sunday. There's still a real chance to have a winning homestand. If you can win 2 of these next 3, then they will. Golden State, that's a winnable game nowadays. It's obviously still tough. Orlando's a very winnable game, and the Wolves just beat Denver a couple weeks ago. They also just lost to them most recently, but they have the home and home at Denver before being done with the Nuggets here. So home for Denver Sunday, and then at Denver on a TNT game next Tuesday. All that to say, still a difficult rest of the homestand, still some winnable games out there. They're a game above 500 and plummeted from the 5th spot in the West to the 9th spot in the West after this loss, because that's just kind of how things are right now in the Western Conference. So they're currently 9th. They are a half game ahead of the Jazz for 10th. They're also a half game behind the Warriors in the 5th spot. So I don't know. And they're also only 1 game behind the Clippers for the 4th spot. So, yeah, I don't know. This thing's going to change every single day. Okay. That's all we have for you on this one. Again, Wednesday, we'll preview that Warriors matchup. I do want to look a bit more at Ant's numbers, some of his improvement and this stretch of late, and just dive in a little bit to the peripherals and not just we'll look at the game logs and all that stuff, but beyond the counting stats, what does this look like? And, can we make the case for him being an all-star? Because I think the case can be made. I predicted a couple weeks ago he wouldn't make the all-star team. That was before he got on this heater. So I want to revisit that a little bit on Wednesday's show. So we'll do that. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Of course, you can find Locked On Wolves anywhere you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now, for your second listen, go check out the Game to Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.